Okay, good afternoon. We met in the morning. I'm Dr. Yasar Bodur. I'm the director of EDS programs in teaching and learning. But we're going to talk about some EDS-related policies and procedures that apply to all EDS programs, not only teaching and learning. And when I say teaching and learning, I'm talking about early childhood, middle grades, secondary, and special ed. But this session applies to EDS programs beyond my department. And we will talk about some policies and procedures because we made some changes to our EDS policies recently. And these changes mainly apply to what we used to call action research process. In our EDS programs, we want our students to learn some research skills so that they have those skills to do research in their profession. At the same time, when they read research, we want them to understand what they're reading and they are critical consumers of the information that they're reading. So research is part of our EDS studies, and we used to call it action research. Now we will call it field-based research study. So you might want to get used to that phrase, field-based research study. So the changes we made in our programs are mainly related to this field-based research study. Now I have this page open on the computer. If you go on College of Education website, everything I'm going to show you today can be found on College of Education website. As far as I know, you have the paper copies of all of these. So you can actually find the education specialist, field-based research policies and procedures, this whole thing on the College of Education website. So if anything happens to your paper copy, you lose it, just go back and find it. Again, as I said, this is mainly about the field-based research part, so I will talk about what we have now, and I will refer back to what we used to have. Having said that, I know more about the policies in my department. There are minor differences between what happens in my department and what happens in educational leadership and reading education and such. So whenever I say something wrong or I skip something, Mrs. Cross is going to join us and give you some additional information. So in this research sequence, we look at 3 courses. You start with educational statistics, and this is the basic descriptive and inferential statistics. Nothing really too advanced, but advanced enough for teachers to do statistics that are important for the class. And then the next class is field-based educational research. In this class, once you get to that class, this is where you plan your field-based study. This is actually when you decide who will be your participants, how many. This is when you decide if you have a hypothesis or not. This is when you decide what kind of data you will collect, under what conditions. You plan everything about your study when you're in this class, and the professor of this class helps you. That's the great thing about that. And the last class in the sequence is 8838 or 8839, depending upon what program you are in. That could be ESED 8839 or EDLD 8839. So this is the final course in our specialist programs. Now remember, you planned your study here. You wrote a proposal. The following semester, you entered this class, and then whatever you planned, you actually implement. So you said you are going to collect survey data from your students. You come to this class, you actually collect the survey data. So this is where you complete your field-based research, and then you defend it, you pass, and you graduate. Everybody's happy. And that happens. We do not run into a lot of problems in our EDS programs because the structure is so well thought out. You get support from different professors throughout the process. You don't just make up anything on your own. You get help from people. Now on this document, one thing you're going to find out is that, as I said, you're going to defend your study. That means there is a committee in front of whom you're going to defend your study. This committee is consisted of 3 people. And these 3 people are, if you're in teaching and learning, you're going to have the professor who helped you plan your study. That's 8434 instructor. The professor who helped you complete your study, that's 8839 instructor. And you're going to have one other person, and you get to choose that person. And that person we call the content specialist. What I mean by that, if you're an early childhood teacher, if you're an elementary school teacher, and you teach math and science, you're in a departmentalized school, and then you're going to do a study on, let's say, scientific inquiry. You're going to look at the website and you're going to find out that in the early childhood program there are a couple people who are specialized in science, and then you're going to get one of them to be the content specialist for your committee. If you're in secondary education, you're going to find somebody from secondary education program. If you're in educational leadership, that kind of works out differently. Mrs. Carson is going to explain that. But the content specialist is someone that you get to choose, at least in TNL programs. That's the committee, 3 people. Those 3 people will sit like we did in the mock presentation today. They will listen to your presentation, they will ask you questions. That kind of sounds scary, but those are the 3 people also who will help you as you write your field-based study. So they will know about your study. You get a lot of support. So it's not as scary as it may sound on the paper. Now, you're going to find detailed information about the roles of different people on your committee. The content specialist is the person who knows the content. You're doing a study on elementary science, you want somebody who has a good information about the literature on elementary science, so that that person can tell you, you know, you need to read this important study, you need to read this person. The second person, the 8434 instructor, this person helps you plan your study, but there are some couple additional details. This person will also help you write the first draft of your IRB application. IRB application, IRB stands for Institutional Review Board. Any study you do that involves humans, you have to go through IRB. IRB has to say, yes, this study poses no more than minimum risk to human subjects. Once your study is approved, then you're good to implement your intervention, collect your data. So this person is going to help you write your IRB, and then you're going to go with that IRB to your next instructor, 8839. And this person is going to help you submit your IRB application, collect your data, finish your study, defend your study, and any type of communication needed in that time period, like when you're ready to defend your study, you have to bring all your committee members. You will need help with that, and your 8839 instructor is going to be there to help you with all of that. Now, probably I'm not talking about every single detail here, because you can go back and read them. I'm just touching on the most important things. Of course, this document includes your roles and responsibilities. We have responsibilities, so do you. So number one thing is, you have to have a copy of this document, and you should know what your roles and responsibilities are. Now, it's not very complicated. You have a professor who tells you to do such and such, you should do such and such. You know, listening to your professors is one of the things. You will have a content specialist, but you're not going to have that content specialist as a professor in this research sequence. It's an outside person that you will email and communicate with. So it's kind of your responsibility to make sure that your content specialist is being informed throughout the process. Your other instructors will help with that, but that is your main responsibility. I will go back to the elementary science example. Let's say you're taking the field-based research class with Dr. Griffin, and then you picked a science professor from teaching and learning, Dr. Burkich, as your content specialist. You're not going to have a class with Dr. Burkich. She will be your content specialist, so you're not going to see her in a class, but you will have to still keep her informed. So it's your job to keep that person informed throughout the process until you finish your study. Now, in the past, we had a whole bunch of different forms that we used in this field-based research process. We had forms A through D. A had a certain function. Form A was when you came up with a topic. Form B was when you were entering your research class. Form C was when you were scheduling your defense, and Form D was when you finish your defense. We said, no, that's just way too many forms. It's confusing. It's confusing for us too. Not only confusing, but it's, it's hard to keep up with that much paperwork. We changed that. Now we work with only two forms that you have to deal with, and I'm going to show the first one. We have two forms. One is a topic approval form, and the second one is the defense form. Topic approval. We talked about coming up with a topic in the morning. So when you come up with a study, when you have your problem in mind, you are going to go through some thinking about what it is. So this form gives you that basics. I'm going to pass this name business. Okay. What's the purpose of your study? We are not asking you to write a paper. We just want to see if you have an idea about your study. We are looking for one paragraph here. What is the purpose of your study? The purpose of my study is to investigate if cooperative learning helps 5th grade students in understanding geometry, whatever it may be, something like that. So you write a short purpose. Before you go into your method class, we want to know if you know what kind of literature you're going to look into. Remember, I was talking about at least look at the title, and whatever concepts you have in your title, at least you should look into that in the literature. So here you would say, I'm going to do some literature review on cooperative learning. I'm going to look at elementary math. I'm going to look at elementary math learning difficulties. So you're going to show your professor that you have an idea about what you're going to look into. The next thing, your research questions or hypotheses. Research questions will be fine. Once again, this is not the final document. We just want to know that you actually have an idea. Because we talked about research questions this morning, I'm sure you have a good idea about how to formulate one. So you're going to say, here are the research questions I'm thinking about. Next thing, you will explain who will be your participants. You'll say, I'm planning to study 5th grade students at my school. There are 100 of them, and I'm going to have 50 of them in my study. Location of your school, you'll say, I work in Claxton, Georgia, whatever it may be. And then a proposed timeline. This timeline, we want to make, remember how I was telling you that you have to do something researchable that you can finish in a reasonable amount of time? We want to make sure that you're proposing something that you can actually finish within the limits of an EDS course. So if you're proposing a study that will take 2 years to collect data, we are not going to approve your study before you get into methods class. We will say, we need you to rethink your study and change this data collection from 2 years to 2 months. So that's the goal of this. It's, we want to see that you're actually thinking about your study, and if we see any problems, we will talk to you, fix those problems, and then carry on. And then you will collect the kind of data, you will talk about the kind of data that you have to collect. Now the significance of this form. In order to enter that field-based research class, EDUR 8434, you have to have this form signed by your content specialist. That means you have to have a content specialist before you go into EDUR 8434. That's the field-based research class. In fact, the more specific guidelines is that you have to have this form signed and submitted 2 weeks before the end of the semester that's prior to the semester of EDUR 8434. If you're going to take it in fall 2017, you have to have all this business taken care of before the end of spring 2017, 2 weeks before the end of spring 2017. Please make those calculations in your head. I don't want you to get in trouble, because that class became a permission-only class, the research method class. Unless you have this form signed and submitted, you're not going to be able to enroll in field-based research class. Am I missing anything, Ms. Cross? Okay. And once it's signed, That goes to Ms. Cross, and then she will enroll you in field-based research class. Now, one other thing about our new policies and procedures is the paper template. In the past, different professors had, different templates for their own sections, for their own classes. So we, as a college, decided that if we give our students, all of our EDS students, a consistent paper template, a format that they can follow, it will serve them well, it will serve us well. So when you are in your research methods class, field-based research, you write the introduction, lit review, and all that. But the expectations in the literature, regardless of who the instructor is of that field-based research class, you're going to follow the same format. So if person A comes to my class after the field-based research class from Dr. Griffin's class or from Dr. Williams-Johnson, won't matter who the instructor is. We will all have the same format. So I would like you to make sure that you study this format and become very familiar with it, because you're going to follow this format, and by the time you finish your study, you will have something written under each of these headings. This makes everything easier for you and for us. In the past, we did not even have these explanations, so you at least have an explanation, and you know that in your literature review, we are expecting at least 20 studies. In the introduction part, we are expecting you to talk about such and such. So this is one of the other expectations in our EDS programs. Now, we don't need to go back to how to write a literature review or introduction. The most important piece, I guess, I can mention here is that if you're conducting a quantitative study, for example, under the method section, you will talk about your variables, you will talk about your research question, hypotheses, whatever it may be. If you're doing a qualitative study, non-statistical, in that case, in qualitative studies, you might need to talk about, other things. Let's see. I think it's under, there you go. Like role of the researcher, data triangulation, ethical considerations. You don't necessarily talk about those things if you're doing a statistical study. But if you're doing a qualitative study, you would do such things. So we spelled out everything for you. Now, in all of this, I guess couple things that are really important for you to keep in mind. One is the IRB. IRB may take a long time. Sometimes they are quick, sometimes they are not. So by the time you finish your field-based research class, you have to make sure that you have an IRB application ready to go. Make it as good as possible so that it can be submitted immediately, and then as soon as you have your approval, then you're good to conduct your study. That's one thing. The other thing is, our IRB board likes it if you have some kind of support letter from your school, from your principal. Most of our students do their studies in their classrooms or in their schools. So if you can get some type of letter from the principal or from the superintendent, whoever it may be, that says, such and such will conduct this study and we support that. Something to that effect. It doesn't have to be complicated. If you can obtain a letter like that early on, it will serve you really, really well. And one last thing that I want to say, this is not necessarily about the format or policies, but I guess this is a policy for the whole EDS programs in the college. Make sure that you learn how to cite using APA. When you don't cite properly, even when unintentional, plagiarism is plagiarism, and people get in trouble even when they don't mean anything badly. And when you do research, you are, bringing information from outside sources. So these field-based research study papers are, wonderful places for people to make that mistake. I would like you to be very careful with that. When you're bringing information from outside sources, from books, from articles, websites, be sure that you cite everything properly. If you have any direct quotes, make sure you have your page numbers, because we do not want our students to get in trouble, even if they don't mean it. If there's any evidence of plagiarism on a paper, we kind of have to deal with it, even if we don't want. So I would like you to be careful with that. Having said that, I will take your questions. Did I miss anything, Ms. Cross? No? Questions? I know that was a lot of information in a short time. Yes, ma'am.
All right, for our committee, you mentioned for the doctoral students, somebody as the head, but for our committee, is there anybody that's the head, or are they all?
Great question. Your content specialist is the only person who is kind of constant in this process, right? So you pick a content specialist, and that content specialist will be your content specialist when you're in the research class. That same person is still your content specialist when you're finishing the program, when you're in the final class. So that person is the only constant person. The instructor of your last class, 8839, which is a seminar and field study, that person chairs your defense. So that person is in charge of your defense, not the chair of your committee, but the chair of the defense. You know, somebody has to organize everything. Somebody has to bring everybody together. So 8839 person does that. We kind of removed that title chair from this process, but looking at what people do, and given your content specialist is the only person who stays in the process from your very first step until the very last step, I guess that would be the most likely person who would be acting as the chair of the committee. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you.
It's the same for educational leadership. I think you said that leaders can say something else.
Ms. Cross, anything, I really don't know much about educational leadership, EDS, so if there's anything to be added, can you please?
How they have leadership set up right now is your advisor will be your content specialist. So for EDS, it's Dr. Hadabaugh right now. If you're in Tier 1 EDLD, it's Dr. Toby Jenkins-Henry for higher ed. I believe Dr. Hadabaugh for P12. So reading, generally those folks have gone through their advisor. ITech, same thing, reach out to your advisor. School psychology is a little bit different. Sometimes it's your advisor, sometimes it's the program coordinator. So non-teaching and learning programs start with your advisor first and see if they're going to sign off on your topic approval form. And if so, then they're going to be your content specialist. And then the same committee setup, your 8434 instructor will be on it. And then the 8839 instructor might also be your content specialist, depending on how the course is set up. So if that's the case, they bring in a separate person out of that department to be the third person on your committee. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So start with your advisor if you're in a non-teaching and learning program.
You're not in teaching and learning. Communicate with your advisor. It seems like there's somebody assigned to be the content specialist for given programs, which could be a good thing. You don't have to worry about finding a content specialist. Having said that, if you ever have a difficult time finding a content specialist, there are times you send an email, a request to someone, and say, could you please be the content specialist of my committee? And then you wait for a week or 10 days and you get no response. A lot of things may happen. Your email may go to the spam folder if it's coming from a non-Georgia Southern email, or it's just an oversight on the part of the person. If you have a difficult time finding a content specialist, especially those who are in teaching and learning department, get in touch with your program director. At the moment, it's me. I will help you find a content specialist. I know everybody in my department and their specialties. So when you have difficulty, you come to me and I say, okay, go contact such and such. And when I say go contact such and such, before I tell you, I've probably contacted the person already. So the person is expecting an email from you, something like that. I'm sure you can do the same thing in other programs. If you get to choose a content specialist and if you're having a hard time, probably the program director, and I would use Ms. Cross as the last resort because she gets emails about everything. So that's probably the program director should deal with that before Ms. Cross does. Yes, ma'am.
But today when we saw the mock defense, she had a really slick slideshow to go with it. Is that part of the defense?
Yes.
Okay.
I think in all of our, at least again, I'll talk for TNL. I'm sorry, I don't know how things go in the other departments. Yeah, our students do a PowerPoint presentation. They usually talk about their study for 10 to 15 minutes, and then whatever you saw during the mock presentation today, the same thing happens. Exact same thing. You present, we ask you questions, and then we make comments. We ask you to step out, we call you back in, and then we hug people for congratulations. We did not do that today, but there are congratulations hugs at the end. Yeah. Yes.
So, that 8838 or 8839 take the last semester.
Yeah.
And so say we get the IRB signed off on and turned in, but say it takes 60 days for it to come back. We can't start any research until it comes back. So if we're collecting data and say it needs to be minimum 3 weeks, so that's 2 months and 3 weeks, it's eaten up into the semester. But then we need to get the paper finished and defense done. So if we have a long-term research to do, so 2 or 3 months, we need to stretch 8838 to 2 semesters? Is that what?
There are a few things you can do in that situation, and I have seen that thing happen. So again, the best thing is to have your IRB paperwork ready the moment you step out of your field-based research class. That's the class before 8839. And as soon as the day you begin 8839, make sure your IRB paperwork is submitted. Now, in many cases, it doesn't take 2 months. Very soon after, I would say in a week or so after you submit your IRB paperwork, if there is something that you need to correct, they will let you know. And there are times you have to go through multiple rounds of revisions. But I have not seen 2 months. It doesn't take that long, but let's say it did. And then you have a long enough intervention. In that case, you would negotiate with your 8839 instructor and say, is it reasonable to shorten my intervention, and instead of implementing my study for 6 weeks, can I bring it down to 4 weeks? That happened. Some of my students had to do that. If we have to make such changes, we will. And if the time is really tight, I have had students who had to, after finishing their data collection in 2 weeks, they had to finish writing up their paper, schedule their defense, hold their defense. It happens. But when one of my students is in that situation, when I get something from that student, the very same day, I will respond to that student. That student needs feedback, that student gets the feedback the very same day, because I know that student doesn't have time. Time is not a luxury. So your professor would work with you. But if time is impossible for you to finish, the first thing to do is to get, kind of figure that out before it's the last day of withdrawal without academic penalty. Because there's a certain date by which you can withdraw from the class and you get no academic penalty. If you are feeling that your study is not going to be completed by the end of the semester, so use that, deadline and withdraw from the class, and then, get your IRB approval meanwhile and take the class the next semester. And in most cases, if a student is in danger of, not finishing the study because of IRB issues, your professor will probably say something to you like, I want to remind you, Monday is the last day before withdrawal without academic penalty. You might want to consider that. I do that with my students. So there are multiple ways to deal with it, but being proactive is the best way. That's why the students who are going to have me in the fall, I'm making them submit their IRBs right now. That's a little too proactive, but just to give you an idea.